Hello, Tony, your deck architect here, back on my channel once more with another deck profile. Now, Power of the Elements has a lot to explore. From meta dominators like Sprite to cool updates to Punk, there is no shortage of decks that I can cover. But today I want to take a look at something a bit more experimental. Descending from the vastest ocean in the universe, space, today we're going to be taking a look at Yu-Gi-Oh's newest TCG exclusive archetype in the Goatee. Now, the Goatee are an interesting archetype to say the least. Not just an archetype of Celestial Aquatica, the Goatee is also a clever wordplay of the English language. See, if you were to pronounce the GH in Goatee as you would pronounce the GH in enough, the O in the same way you would pronounce the O in women, and the TI in the same way you would pronounce the TI in initiate, the word Goatee can actually be pronounced as fish, proving once again that the English language makes no sense whatsoever. But playstyle wise, the Goatee are a lot more organized. Focused on banishing themselves to return at a later point in time, the Goatee employ a disruptive synchro strategy aimed at making fish synchros on the opponent's turn to take advantage of powerful on-summon effects. This is bolstered by the support available to both banish strategies and fish strategies released as of late, which help the deck smoothly execute its game plan despite its very limited pool of Goatees available. This all comes together to prove something very fishy, in more ways than one. And you'll understand exactly what I mean by that as I get through the deck profile. So with that, I believe I've droned on long enough. Without a further ado, let's get into the deck profile. Starting things off, we begin with the core Playmakers of the archetype in our 3 Paces Light of the Goatee and 3 Shift Fairy of the Goatee. As tuners, each of these celestial fish possess a unique effect aimed at banishing themselves for some benefit. Paces can banish itself from the field to special summon any fish from the hand, while Shift can banish itself from the graveyard to increase the attack of a fish by 500. Both monsters, however, share a common effect that allows them to special summon themselves on the standby phase of the turn after they are banished. This is meant to feed into their other shared effect, which allows both monsters to perform a synchro summon of a fish synchro on the opponent's turn that they were special summoned. Taking all this in, it's not hard to formulate the intended strategy of the Goatee. Using their unique banishing effects on our turn, we can set up our tuners to return on our opponent's turn. Then, on our opponent's turn, we can make use of their shared effects to then perform synchro summons into powerful fish monsters. And in understanding that, it's also not hard to see how our 2 tuners play into that strategy. Paces can banish itself to put any non-tuner fish onto the field to set up both components of the Goatee strategy. It's also relevant to note that this effect can summon any level of fish, meaning that it can also be used to cheat out high level monsters for aggression as well. Shift's effect on the other hand is incredibly relevant long term. Since your tuners only revive themselves when banished, synchro summoning with a card like Paces tends to be a one-shot kind of deal unless you have another way to banish it from the graveyard. This, however, is not a problem with Shift, who can inherently banish itself from the graveyard. Thus, synchro summoning with Shift only helps to put it back to the graveyard to be banished again, ensuring that you will always have a continuous stream of Goatee tuners to play, so long as you control a fish monster to boost. But for the entire Goatee strategy to work, the deck would also need to have non-tuners to sync with their tuners. Fortunately, Power of the Elements provides us with one such archetypal option in Eonok Sentry of the Goatee. Eonok is a level 6 non-tuner fish that, when summoned, can bring out any banished level 4 or lower fish monster. This is meant to combo well with our Paces, who can banish itself to summon out Eonok, conveniently providing Eonok a target to then summon with its own effect. Additionally, Eonok can also banish a fish from the hand or face-up field to add a Goatee trap from your deck to your hand. This has applications that we'll discuss later. As a level 6 fish, Eonok, alongside any Goatee tuner, immediately produces any level 8 synchro, of which you have access to several powerful options like Adamancipator Risen Dragite or White Aura Whale. Alternatively, Eonok can banish that same tuner to instead search for a Goatee trap, enabling a delayed synchro on the following turn with additional layers thanks to the trap it searches. With that being said, we're only playing one Eonok in this deck because its use is still rather limited. As a level 6, he's not exactly the easiest to get out without Paces, and as his effects require other fishes to function, he's not great early on either. Likely, Enoch will be a card that you want to access sometimes, but not always. And with a way to search for him from the deck in a card that we'll also discuss later, we have little need to run multiples of him. As such, he's relegated to a one-of that will likely only be searching in scenarios where we are set up to utilize him. Now, before we proceed forward with the rest of our main deck, I'm going to divert a bit first to talk about our Goatee Synchro options. Power of the Elements was nice enough to grant Goatees with not one, but two powerful Synchros to work with. They are our Ascan, the Bichord Goatee, of which we play 2, and Goatee of the Deep Beyond, of which we play 3. Both of these Synchros, as fishes, are viable options to be accessed through our Goatee's Tuner's Quick Synchro effect. And fitting to the strategy, both come packing with a on-summon effect that you can immediately use upon summoning it on your opponent's turn. Ascan on summon can target a fish monster you control and a card your opponent controls and banish them. Deep Beyond on summon during specifically your opponent's turn can banish every card on the field. These effects ensure that when made on your opponent's turn, they can immediately impact the board with effects that can be pretty debilitating to your opponent. Ascan's ability to banish any card on the field helps take out key pillars in your opponent's board, while Deep Beyond's own effect is a literal field nuke, clearing the entire field of everything to reset any buildup of an opponent's field. But that's not all. Like our Goatee tuners, both Synchros also have their own ways of returning from the banished. Ascan, upon being banished, can banish any fish from your graveyard to bring itself right back. This makes Ascan a viable target for its first effect, with the benefit of doing so being that you can then banish the Goatee tuner you used to make Ascan to bring Ascan straight back to your field, for what amounts to a one-sided banish into follow-up. Deep Beyond, like your Goatee tuners, returns itself to the field in the next standby phase after it was banished from the monster zone. This means that regardless of if it banishes itself with its own first effect, Deep Beyond will come back on your opponent's turn to bring the hurt. And unlike Ascan, who has a set attack, Deep Beyond's attack is determined by the number of banished monsters both players have. This means that through effects like Shift, or Ascan, or Deep Beyond itself, Deep Beyond can get very big throughout the course of a game, to potentially become a game ender all on its own. With a majority of our Goatees now covered, we now move on to the Supplementary Engine of the deck. As many would expect, 3 cards does an archetype not make, and with only 3 main deck monsters to its name, the Goatees aren't exactly fully fleshed out. Thus, the deck requires additional engines to help make up for the lack of in-archetype options. With that being said, the Supplementary Engine for Goatees needs to do a few things. The first is that it must be able to banish the Goatees in some way or form. At the end of the day, we want to make use of the Goatee's unique gimmick, and thus we need a way to banish them to do so. Thus, our Supplementary Engine should pack some built-in banishing options to help set up our Goatee plays on the side. The second is that it must be able to generate a slew of high-level non-tuners. As you may have noticed, the level requirements to make our Synchros with our Goatee tuners requires that our non-tuners be a minimum of level 6. Thus, our Supplementary Engine should be able to drop highish level monsters with ease as to provide the Goatees with the necessary material for their effects. The last thing is that it needs to be able to back up the Goatees in some way. As cool as the Goatee mechanic may be, it tends to be lackluster without some form of backup threat. Thus, regardless of the Goatee plays, our Supplementary Engine should be able to do something on its own to combat our opponent's plays independently. Now, a few engines fit these criteria, with one that I imagine many gravitating to being the Super Ancient Deep Sea King Coelacanth package. And while that engine does have its merits, I find that it's incredibly dependent on a singular monster, and often very bricky. Instead, the engine that I've chosen to go with is another TCG exclusive archetype. Marking their return since Phantom Rage, we're backing up our fish today with some Mutants. So why Mutants? Well, let's review the criteria I've laid out. On the first requirement, the Mutants focus on banishing cards to pay for a variety of their effects. This synergizes well with our Goatees to trigger our tuners, not only setting up our Goatee plays, but also alleviating the heavy costs of our Mutants. On the second requirement, the smaller Mutants excel in banishing cards to bring out powerful level 8 mutant bosses. This easily provides our Goatees with a cheap level 8 non-tuner to conveniently make Goatee of the Deep Beyond. Lastly, on that final requirement, beyond just being a level 8 non-tuner, the mutant bosses are fairly strong in their own right. Packing decent targeting protection, built-in disruption, and fairly large attack stats, they are perfectly capable of standing on their own. Thus, with all three criteria met, we delve into this proposed mutant engine beginning with 3 mutant M05, 1 mutant ST46, and 1 mutant. Now, for those who don't know what these guys do, each of these lower level mutants have a shared mutate effect to tribute themselves and banish another card from the hand or field to summon out a unique monster, depending on what type of card was banished. This is how we will be getting out our bigger mutant boss monsters, while also additionally triggering our Goatee tuners. And we're playing the specific ratio of 3-1-1 based on the additional utility each one provides. M05 searches for a mutant monster on summon, which allows us access to our other mutants, thus we're playing him at 3. ST46 can search for a mutant spell or trap on summon, but we're not nearly as reliant on those in this version of the deck, thus we only need 1 copy. Mutant can also banish cards from the deck for its mutate effect, but can only banish mutant cards, which reduces its synergy with the Goatees. Furthermore, Mutant can special summon himself from the hand while you control another mutant monster, and will drain you of life equal to whatever mutant monster you bring out with his mutate effect. This makes Mutant more of an independent extender for purely the mutant side of the deck, and usually one that you can only afford to use once. Thus, we limit him to 1 copy in the deck. From there, we then have our big mutants. As I mentioned earlier, your little mutants can summon out these larger mutants directly from your hand or deck depending on what type of card was banished for their effects. If a monster was banished, then you can summon out a mutant beast, of which we played 2. If you banish a trap, then you can summon out a mutant arsenal, of which we play 1. And if you banish a spell, theoretically you could bring out a mutant mist, but we aren't playing any copies of mist in this deck as we have little interest in banishing our spells. Each of these larger mutants have targeting protection against the type of card banished to bring them out, with Beast untargetable by monster effects and Arsenal being untargetable by trap effects. Furthermore, each can respond to a different card effect activation by banishing a card from your hand or field to do something. Beast can respond to a spell activation to negate said spell and banish it, while Arsenal can respond to a monster effect activation to target any monster and banish it. These effects act as decent disruption in the current meta, with the added benefit of being another outlet for you to banish and trigger your Goatees. Lastly, each of these large mutants also have a floating effect that allows them to grab back a banished mutant card when destroyed by your opponent's card. Beast allows you to grab back a mutant trap, while Arsenal allows you to grab back a mutant spell. Likely you won't be triggering this effect very often, but it can come up at specific moments to grab back something you may have banished from Mutants effect, to functionally pseudo-search for a monster or trap. With the core monsters now covered, we wrap up our monster lineup with some hand traps. Due to the banish focused nature of the deck, it would be pretty remiss for us to not at least play the 3-dimension shifter to blow out some matchups. From there, we then have the 2 Ash Blossom as a means of search denial, as well as the Psyframe Gear Gamut package as a way to protect our mutant plays or to negate our opponent's plays. Moving into the spells, we're playing a fair amount of cards all designed to smooth out the consistency of our deck. Starting it off, we have 2 Parry Raise Map, which conveniently can search for all our 0 attack Goatee tuners as well as our 0 attack M05. We then have 3 E-Telly as a way to tutor out our smaller mutants, as all of them are psychic. We have 2 Ready Fusion as a way to bring out a non-tuner for synchros or mutate fodder, 1 Dimensional Fissure as a way to continuously banish our Goatees, and 3 Pot of Prosperity as a way to dig for any of those aforementioned cards. Lastly, we're playing 2 unique field spells. The first is the mutant field spell Mutant Research Lab. When activated, Mutant Research Lab can special summon a level 4 or lower mutant from the hand or banished, acting as additional recovery or extension. More importantly is that Mutant Research Lab can, once per turn, place any mutant from the hand to the bottom of the deck to draw a card. This helps us put our larger mutants back into the deck to alleviate bricks, while hopefully digging for something more playable. The second field spell is the Goatee field spell in the most distant deepest depths. While you control a fish synchro, deepest depths cannot be destroyed or banished by card effects. This gives it resilience against your opponent's removal, but also makes it immune to your own Deep Beyond's field-wide banished. But even if Deepest Depths would be sent to the graveyard, Deepest Depths can return itself to the hand by banishing a fish monster you control whenever you would summon a fish monster. This acts as another outlet to trigger your Goatees, while also allowing you peace of mind when opting to replace Deepest Depths with a different field spell. Most importantly about Deepest Depths is its own once per turn effect, which can banish a fish from the hand or graveyard to then add any Goatee from your deck to your hand. This effect is how you will be likely searching into your Enoch, while acting as another way to trigger your Goatee tuners. Sadly, like Enoch, this effect is limited at the current moment by the lack of diverse options it can access, and the requirement of banishing other fish means that's definitely not a card you want to see super early on. But it does have its merits once set up, and as such is something you do want to have at least one copy of for potential use down the line. Going into our traps, we actually have a fairly small trap lineup. Unfortunately, due to how Deep Beyond's field-wide banish works, we don't want to be playing too many cards that stay on the field, as we would just end up banishing them. Thus, the only traps that we're playing are ones that can offer immediate impact to our opponent. We're playing the one Goatee Chain as our search target for our Enoch. When activated, Goatee Chain can banish a Goatee we control to summon a different Goatee from the hand, deck, or graveyard. This function allows us to trade any Goatee we control for a different one that we don't have in rotation, and it sets up a very cool play with our Ascan to go from it into Deep Beyond in the same turn. From there, we have two Mutant Cry. Mutant Cry can shuffle back materials from the hand or graveyard to summon out a Mutant Fusion monster from the X deck. This card is more in the deck to be banished for our Mutant Mutants effect, but can also serve as a way to shuffle back our used mutants to summon out a Disruptive Fusion on our opponent's turn. Lastly, we have three Infinite Impermanents as effect negation that can also be used with a mutant to make arsenal in a pinch. And finally, wrapping things up with the remainder of our X deck, we have a mix of other monsters that we could potentially access using any combination of Goatees, mutants, and spells. We have two Mutant Synthesis as our preferred target for our Mutant Cry. We have a Roaring Ocean Snake as well as an Alvis the Vein Besence as our targets for our Ready Fusion, one Chang Ying and one Barone as generic synchro options to be made using a Big Mutant and a Goatee tuner, one White Aura Whale as well as one Adamantipated Risen Dragon as alternative options to Ascan, one Geomathmech Final Sigma as an option we can make using a Deep Beyond and a Goatee tuner that is also unaffected by a Deep Beyond's field wipe, and one Area the Water Charmer as a link option to be made in desperate situations where the levels just don't work. Now, it's at this point that we would reach the combo component of the deck profile. However, at its current iteration, the Goatees really don't have many complex plays to showcase. In most scenarios, you will be playing a slow tempo game, with the intention being to control your opponent's plays through your mutant effects and Goatee synchros. The real nice part about it all is the unique synergy that the Goatee tuners have with your mutant boss monsters, who can either tune with your tuners to make Deep Beyond or banish your tuners to pay for their own disruption. This gives you some pretty flexible plays in regards to how you want to disrupt your opponent and build your board in the long run. With that being said though, the Goatees do have something of a combo that involves specifically having a Paces and an Enoch to end on two waves of disruption on your opponent's turn. The way that this combo works is by first normal summoning out your Paces and using its effect to banish itself to summon out your Enoch. Enoch on summon will then summon back your Paces to your field. From there, you'll activate Enoch's other effect to banish your Paces to add a Goatee Chain to your hand, of which you will then set to your field and pass turn to your opponent. On your opponent's turn, your Paces will return to the field thanks to having been banished by your Enoch in the turn prior. This also allows you to synchro summon during your opponent's main phase with your Enoch to produce an Ascan. Ascan on summon will then allow you to activate its effect to target itself and one of your opponent's cards, of which you'll then chain the Goatee Chain to your Ascan, targeting your Ascan to banish Ascan to summon a different Goatee from your deck. Now, the cool part about Ascan's effect is that regardless of what happens to one of its targeted cards, it will still attempt to banish the other target. This means that even if banished by your Chain, Ascan will still banish your opponent's card. Regardless, Chain will resolve to banish your Ascan to summon out a Shift from your deck, before Ascan will then trigger to banish the pieces in your graveyard to resummon itself to the field. Since Shift was summoned on your opponent's turn, this allows Shift to also Synchro summon on your opponent's turn, to tune with your Ascan at a later point in time to make a Goatee of the Deep Beyond for a field-wide banish. The end result is a targeted banish of a card followed by a non-targeted banish of every card on the field, for twin disruptions on your opponent's turn. And that's going to do it for our Goatee deck profile. So, what are my final thoughts? Well, I think the deck definitely has a good start. Paces and Shift both lay the groundwork for a really interesting playstyle, and Enoch is also not half bad. Backed by its field spell that operates as a Rhoda every turn, and I think the deck has the roots of something really good. But that doesn't mean the deck doesn't have its weaknesses. Extrapolating from the stats of our currently available monsters, the deck has a problem finding good non-tuners to actually sync with on our opponent's turn. And without a way to protect our weaker Goatees from battle, the deck can very easily fail to being baited out by just entering the battle phase. Hopefully future support can improve this deck further, because the art on these cards are fantastic, and the wordplay present in this archetype is very clever. Regardless, this has been Tony, your deck architect with a Goatee deck profile. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time.